All right, hello everybody. Welcome to Slam, the podcast that reviews DC superheroes throughout the ages. I'm your co-host Mike Allen. I'm joined by
Joshua Mervell, and today we're taking a look at the history and the first editions of the character Hawkman.
Yes, Hawkman, the guy who completely screwed up DC continuity forever. We're going to get to that. But before we get to that, let's introduce our guest host today, Adam Peltier. Thanks for joining us, Adam.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me back. Very excited to talk about this convoluted character and his confusing timeline.
Well, and before we started rolling, you had mentioned that you feel like you deserve a PhD in Hawkman. Do you want to tell us some of the things you learned about Hawkman before you came on tonight's show?
Basically, his continuity, spoilers a little bit for what we're going to be discussing, was so convoluted that basically DC banned Grant Morrison, of all people, from including him in his run of Justice League. So when you don't even trust Grant Morrison to salvage a character, that says a lot.
Then you know something's wrong. Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah, should we? I don't know what order we should do. Should we just review these comics, then talk about the convolution, or should we talk about the convolution? Josh, what do you think?
Maybe just talk about it first. That way, it'll give context to the comics and stuff.
So, as most people know, DC invented the reboot. I'm gonna go down in history as saying they invented the reboot. But they had all these old characters from the 40s that had been canceled, and in the mid to late 1950s, they started bringing them back, starting with The Flash, who we already reviewed. This week it's Hawkman. Next they did Green Lantern. No, I've got it out of order. Then Green Lantern, then Hawkman, then the Atom. Now, for some reason, they could have kept going, but they stopped. They could have revived Our Man, the Spectre, Dr. Fate, but they didn't. Later, they chose to bring back the Golden Age versions of those characters and keep them on Earth 2, okay? But anyway, so that's what they did. Then they established that these new versions of these characters were on Earth 1, the old ones were on Earth 2. After Crisis happened in 1986, they decided to kind of restart their continuity over from scratch. Man of Steel by John Byrne, Wonder Woman by George Perez, Batman Year One by Frank Miller. And it somewhat was coherent and it somewhat made sense. But then two things happened in 1989 at the same time. One of them was the Legion of Superheroes editors decided they didn't want to have Superboy in their history anymore. So they removed Superboy from their continuity, which completely screwed up the Legion history. Then they decided to jump Legion of Superheroes 5 years into the future, and the Superman editors hated it so much they wanted nothing to do with that Legion, so then they rebooted it again. Like within 5 months, they rebooted it again. And that screwed up Legion forever. At the same time that this happened, Hawkman was a fairly popular character. He had his own monthly series by Tony Isabella. There was a miniseries called Invasion where Thanagar invaded the Earth. It was this massive line-wide crossover, okay? It sold fairly well. It was drawn by Todd McFarlane. So what does DC decide to do to build on the momentum of all this popularity? They decide to wipe out not only the old Silver Age continuity, they wiped out the previous 4 years of continuity they just built on. So now, not only did they say that, Earth 1 and Earth 2 didn't happen, now they're saying these past 3 or 4 years worth of Hawkman stories that you've been enjoying never happened. And when the Hawkworld series came out, I believe it was originally intended as an Elseworld series or an out-of-continuity series. I could be wrong about that. But then the editor decided, no, I'm just going to keep it in continuity. And the original plan was, at the end of the miniseries, it was going to lead into the events of the Hawkman from the Silver Age that we're going to be reviewing today. But then again, at the last minute, they're like, actually, you know what? This didn't happen a few years ago. It happened right now. Which is exactly what they did with Wonder Woman in 1987. Now, what that did then was it erased Hawkman's history in the Justice League. So all those 30 years or 20 years of stories of Hawkman being a member of the Justice League couldn't have happened because he only came to Earth in 1989, right? So it just created this big mess. Now, we might get into this in a future episode of Slam, but after 5-ish years, Hawkworld was again rebooted Then it was rebooted again, and I believe basically Jeff Johns kind of gave up and said, actually, we're just going to bring back the Golden Age version of Hawkman and just say that he keeps getting reincarnated. And that'll explain the Silver Age version and the Hawkworld version. And then a couple years ago, Brian Hitch did a miniseries where they said that all of these Hawkmans were reincarnations even across space and blah, blah, blah. And honestly, I gave up trying to follow it. I don't even, to be honest, care anymore. I really wish they could have done this Hawkworld series that we're going to talk about and just incorporated it more into the Silver Age continuity. And just, who cares? He has a different costume. So what, right? Like, whenever they do Batman flashbacks, they don't draw him in the Adam West costume. They draw him in a black and gray costume, right? So who cares if his costume is different? That's just my opinion. But we'll get to that later. But before we get to that, Josh, I want to know, what did you know about Hawkman before we started this episode?
Pretty much nothing. I had seen him in the Justice League cartoon. I've read some stories where he's appeared, but I don't think I've ever read a Hawkman comic before. I obviously know him from the hierarchy changing Black Adam movie. Of course.
Yes.
But other than that, not a whole lot. And I think I might be more familiar with Hawk Girl than anything, because I think she shows up more, or at least from the episodes that I remember from the Justice League cartoon growing up. So
she was a regular member of the team, and Hawkman was not. Yes.
Right. They
purposely included her because there wasn't enough women, right? There was just Wonder Woman. So they put her in instead. And to be honest, I think at this point, all things considered, DC might as well focus on Hawkwoman, right? Because the characters are almost the same. They have the same backstory. You might as well just use her instead of him and leave him out. But that's just my opinion. Adam, did you ever see the Justice League cartoon from the late 90s, early 2000s?
Yeah. No, I loved that series. And, that was
Sorry,
pretty much
I didn't mean to insult you by asking you if you'd seen it. But yeah, it was a really good show. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yes. I did love that series. And likewise with Josh, my introduction was more with Hawk Girl, Shara, rather than Hawkman. And then I did know a little bit of him, and I did encounter the character a bit on the periphery of the comics I read, but I didn't really know too much about him, just that there was a lot of infamy surrounding how convoluted his backstory was.
Right.
And at the time, I thought, well, this doesn't seem so weird. At first, he's just a reincarnated figure, and then he's an alien. Just two different continuities. But as you explained, the way that these continuities were attempted to be synthesized just didn't make sense. And it got to the point where down the road, there was a storyline where they tried to synthesize all of the Hawkmen into this figure called the Hawk God, which lasted, I think, for about 4 years, and then they also just absolved that. I think there was a scene where he literally was erased from continuity in the panel of a comic because they said, he's just creating too much confusion. We need to get rid of him.
Right. Well, and before we go forward, I just got to say one thing. DC really, it's their fault. Like, it's like, don't they have someone in charge to say, no, you can't do this? Like, by publishing Hawkworld as being in continuity, it screwed up everything. And all it took, considering how much everyone hates corporate comics and, them being owned by Warner Brothers, clearly it was the Wild West. Like, they could do what they wanted. The fact that they could wipe out 30 years of continuity without any... What did they sneak it into the publishing schedule without telling anyone? Right? Like, I don't know how they got away with this, but we'll get to that later. Before we get to any of that, actually, we're going to talk about the very first Hawkman from 19... Let's see here. Hold on a sec. What year was this published? Well, first of all, this is from the same issue that introduced the Flash. This is Flash Comics #1. And what is it? I should know.
46.
No, it's 19. It's definitely before that. It's 40.
Oh, 1940.
1940. Yeah, 1940. Wow. Okay. So, Adam, you're going to tell us what happened in this one.
Oh boy. Well, I do have to say, before we get into this is probably the most coherent origin so far for Hawkman, because there's no continuity before this. It just goes straight ahead. Basically, it starts with those brilliant Golden Age splash pages where we have Hawkman descending upon, well, his adversaries. He's about to do battle, and then in some great, profound text, it explains, before we get into that. So as always, there's that very verbose introduction beginning the tale of a phantom of the night, the Hawkman, who from time immemorial has fought the cause of justice against the force of evil. And then we get into the actual origin story, where we actually have a collector of antiquities. This would be the original Hawkman prior to everything else. Who is it? Well, it is the one and only Carter Hall. Now, Carter Hall is noticing a glowing knife. He touches it, and he has this flashback of ancient Egypt, where he is in the body of another figure. This figure is being tortured by an adversary. I should mention that the character's name that he is having this vision of, I believe, is Prince Khufu. Is that how you pronounce it?
I think so, yeah.
Something like that, yeah.
Okay, we'll just go with that.
Yeah.
So after this very wonderfully epic battle, he goes into the arms of his beloved Shaira, and then after noticing his adversaries coming back to assault him, he is murdered. And in this vision, as he is murdered, stabbed in the chest, he says, "I die, but I shall live again, as shall you, Hatset, and I shall be the victor." So basically setting up the idea that this is going to be a story of resurrection, of these characters coming back at a future time. And indeed, that's what it is. He awakens, I should say Carter Hall awakens from this vision, from the knife, and he goes about just a daily travel to the subway, where there is this explosion that's happening. There is some sort of smoke arising. He's running down to see it, and he runs into Shaira, the woman from his vision. Again, much like him, she has been resurrected and reborn into the modern day. Well, they go about with each other. They take a cab together to escape from the subway. And Carter Hall goes to his laboratory because, of course, he is a scientist as well as an antiquity collector. So while Shaira rests because, she has to, as a woman in the 1940s, she can't stand that much excitement, as all these comics always remind us. She actually has a nap, looks like on a fainting couch as well, as a Hawkman.
I mean, I have a fainting couch, don't you? Anyway.
He takes on the guise of the ancient hawk god Anubis, which I didn't realize was a hawk. I thought it was a jackal. But anyway, according to this, it's a hawk.
It's a jackal, yeah. They're wrong.
Now, this outfit he has full functioning wings, a staff, a silly-looking bird mask, and it's actually comprised of ninth metal, which defies the pull of Earth's gravity. No explanation is given as to how he came about this in this issue, nor what exactly the properties of this is beyond the gravity-defying abilities, but anyway, that's all you need to know. So he goes about in the Hawkman garb. He tracks down someone who has been generating this smoke, this billowy, poisonous smoke that was arising earlier from the subway, and he does battle with him. This person, of course, is the resurrected figure of the person who had killed Carter Hall in that previous vision. He's also worshiping a statue of Anubis as well, which is kind of confusing because they're both somehow avatars of Anubis at the same time. But anyway, he does battle with him. His adversary escapes to the shrine at the same time that Shaira awakens in a state of hypnosis, rising like the female character from the original Mummy movie, and basically is pulled. She wanders to the laboratory of this adversary, and as you can tell, when I keep saying this adversary, I actually have not come across his name so far. I actually don't know what his enemy's name is thus far.
So I'll try to figure it out. Yeah,
it's Bith. In
Oh,
all
yeah.
of the
Biff?
other, in the other two comics, the character's name is Biff. So I'm assuming in this one, it's the same dude.
It's Biff
I'm
Tanner.
looking on fandom.com. It doesn't say anything about Biff. It just says Dr. Haster, Hathset. That's it.
Okay, and I do know Hatset was the name given to the figure in the dream, in the vision he had. Anyway, he's going to do some shenanigans with Shiera, who under a state of hypnosis travels to his lair. He's going to perform the sacrifice. Hawkman stops him by doing the most heroic thing possible, shooting him in the chest with an arrow. Of course, as he dies, he holds his body and says, "You win now, Hawk, my hat. Perhaps I shall not die. Who knows?" So he's a little bit loopy as he's dying in Hawkman's arms. Then, of course, Hawkman picks up Shiera, says something to the Anubis statue, takes her back to the fainting couch, and smokes a pipe in front of a giant window. And that is your origin for Hawkman, the original Carter Hall.
Yeah, Josh?
It's something. It's so strange. It's almost an interesting idea. I don't know. The pieces don't quite fall into place, I guess, for me. Like, I don't know. It just seems everything is very convenient how it kind of works out. So it feels like they had the present day figured out, and then they kind of worked backwards and didn't think as to like how or why the characters are back in the same area, how he got the knife, how he was able to learn that he was this reincarnation of this same guy. So it's I don't know. It's strange. It's short, and it seems like a good jumping off point for an interesting character, an interesting story. I think that it's also very different from a lot of the origins that we read on this. Normally, it's like just a guy that puts on a costume to fight crime, and he's like a detective. So having this almost feel like a Egyptian god Indiana Jones type character that's like finding artifacts, and he stumbles upon this one or this knife or whatever, and then kind of takes on these powers from a god is pretty interesting. But I think that's kind of where the interesting things stop in this particular story.
Well, now I haven't seen the Universal Horror Mummy in a long time. Adam, you familiar with that?
Oh, yes. It's actually one of my favorite Universal monster films, and the parallels are very obvious here. I'm thinking it was released just a few years prior to this, and I think it may have been just this huge influence where someone just said, we need to have a hero that has an origin that coheres to this story somehow. In fact, the story is basically the same. A story of resurrection, of a mad priest who commits a murder or is attempting to... all the pieces fall into place, and you throw into that vaguely Egyptian imagery, such as the figure of Anubis, who is misappropriated because, again, he's a jackal, not a hawk. So, there's stuff happening here that doesn't quite cohere to the claimed source material. It just seems like an attempt to ride the coattails of something that's gaining some popularity.
And that's the thing, is that I guess what I was originally going to say was this has, like Josh said, this has a lot of good ideas, cool concepts. And then I thought, but why did they like trip so much on the delivery? But now I realize, it's because they just copied it from somewhere, right? Like this is like, sorry, fans out there that can't take criticism of comic books, like the guy, anyway, it doesn't matter. But the point is that if you're just going to be a kind of B-movie ripoff of a better idea, then this is what you get. Like, of course there's good ideas, but when you kind of peek behind the curtain and you realize they're just stealing it from better stories or better movies or whatever, then of course this is what you're going to get. Like, for example, the idea of reincarnation is a great one, and like you said, it's not like any other superhero, but the fact that we flash back to his past in Egypt, and then when we cut back to the present, let me see how many panels it takes. One, like 5 panels later, he just happens to bump into Shiera. Like, pardon me, you are Shiera. Shiera, how did you know that? Wouldn't it have been nice to just have a little bit of suspense and delay of gratification where he sees this mysterious girl walking down the street or something? He follows her, or he sees her and then he has like a feeling like, wait a minute, don't I know you? Like the deja vu thing, right? Like there's so many other ways they could have done this exact story. In fact, even in the Mummy remake with Brendan Fraser, they start in the past, then they jump to the present. In this one, they start in the present, jump to the past, but I think it would have been better to even hold out a little bit longer. You know, and again, I'm not expecting it to be a masterpiece. I know it's 1940 comic book, but still, like we can all see how they could have made it better, very simply, right? In the same amount of pages, I think. Why don't we talk about the art a little bit? Because the art is pretty brutal, even by Golden Age standards. I didn't love it. It kind of just looks like, you know, some panels are good, some are bad. The artist who, let me see here, not to insult anyone, but the artist is Dennis Neville, who I've never heard of. Gardner Fox, famous DC writer who wrote up all the way into the 1960s. He's one of the most prolific writers for DC. He's a legend. But this art is pretty generic. Adam, what do you think?
I agree. You know, you look at it and it's Golden Age artwork, and there's nothing else to it. It's just of its time. There's not a lot of dynamics going on and character motion. Things are just kind of assembled together. It looks rushed for the most part. I will say this is relating to the art. The actual character design for Hawkman in this issue, I think for the most part, is on point. Like, he's a very impressive looking hero. The bandolier with the giant wings, the staff, even the color arrangement for him is great. But then the mask is so bizarre because I'm accustomed to Hawkman having like the protruding upper portion of the beak as his mask, but he has the lower part, so it looks like just a man with his mouth with like a goofy looking hawk on top of his face.
You're absolutely right. And I know that Hawkman's mask evolved throughout the 30s or the 40s and 50s, but this mask is brutal, like you said. Like
rough.
Yeah, like I knew that there was a mask where the bottom was on there, but when you have the top, the bottom, and you see his mouth, and you don't really know where is he seeing? Is he seeing out of the hawk's eyes, right? Is it above his eyes? Yeah, it's pretty rough. Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, the mask is not great. I don't know what they were even trying to do. Like, was it supposed to feel like those like capes where it's like made out of like the bear skin or something, and it's still got the skull,
right,
you know, and they kind of like have it on their head, and then the like that could have worked maybe. I know he's got the wings, but like I don't know, they could have done something with like the feathers coming down, or I don't know. It's so strange that it's just like a big mascot head on top on top of a half naked man.
You're right.
It's strange.
So go ahead.
Everything else I think about the costume is really good and very iconic. Like I can't think of really any other heroes, especially at the time, that look like this.
Well, here's the thing. I gotta say, for once, I strongly disagree. I actually think Hawkman has one of the ugliest costumes of the DC Golden Age superheroes. And I know, Adam, you mentioned his color scheme. Now, I have to point out, the Flash, the Green Lantern, and Atom all had completely revised costumes in the 50s. Hawkman is the only one that kept basically the same costume design, right? Gray wings, red boots, red underwear, green pants, yellow X, orange, like everything's almost the same. And I think that's why whenever they do a live action adaptation of Hawkman, he looks like a buffoon. Because first of all, he's bare chested. He has these straps for his wings. The ugly green pants there's no other green on his body. Again, I'm not a fashion designer, but shouldn't there be some type of pattern to his design? Like maybe he should have a green shirt, or maybe his pants shouldn't be green. Maybe they should be orange to match his mask or something. But I just always thought that his costume was brutal. However, this very first shot that you see of him when he's holding his staff and his wings are all spread out, that looks really good. So I guess they had a right idea, but I should point out that this whole design, I believe, was stolen from a Flash Gordon comic book that I'm going to dig up before the podcast. Actually, I'm going to dig it up right now. But basically, I'll try to find a good shot of it. But almost the same design, and including the green pants, I think.
That's pretty interesting, considering it feels like this whole story was ripped off from something else.
Yeah. Wow. And of course, I can't find it, but I'll do my research later. But yeah, there is definitely like characters in Flash Gordon. I'm not sure what they're called, but they look almost the same as this. Oh, they're called the Hawkmen. Sorry.
Oh.
And they live on. Actually, they're sometimes called Hawkmen, and here they're called Winged Birdmen, and they live in Sky City. So I believe the whole concept was ripped off from that. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, the art's not great. It's not completely awful, but it's just it could be so much better. Also, too, even the storytelling in the art isn't fantastic.
I agree.
Like, he gets changed into the Hawkman costume off screen, and we have a panel that's just a solid color with text over it saying that he like changed into his costume, and then we see we see him in the costume afterwards, and then
that's a good point.
We get like another fully just green panel this time with words on it. And it's not like it's a small little box or something narrating like, oh, he changed. It's like an entire actual panel. It's strange, some of the choices in the art, but yeah, I don't think that you could quite tell what was happening in this story without the dialogue.
You know, I think you're right, and while I obviously think that Golden Age comics have their charm and I love them, the fact is that while there were some people like, say, Will Eisner that were using the art form and expanding on the language and developing the language, some of the artists were just terrible. Like, not only were they not good illustrators, like you just said, they weren't even telling a good story. You know, usually you have one or the other, but they couldn't do either. So yeah, the art's pretty brutal. I guess that's all we have to say about it. Oh, we should also point out that we learned in the story that Egyptians from the ancient Near East had blonde hair and Caucasian features. So yeah, if anyone complains about Hawkman's race in the recent Black Adam movie, take a look at this sucker, because this is ridiculous, but whatever.
One last thing I want to say before we move on real quick. The last page, one of the last panels, he defeats the bad guy who is unnamed, and then he takes Shira and like goes to talk to Anubis. But he did make sure to take his wings off and place them on the ground off to the side so we could still see everything in frame. And then he puts them back on to bring her back to bed. Wow. It's so strange. You can see them in the back.
Yep.
Instead of like folding them up or something,
you're right.
He takes his wings off.
Right, he should fold them up like a bird. Right.
It's strange, but...
And then he went and smoked his pipe.
I don't know. That was like the thing that stuck out to me the most for some reason. It's so strange he took them off. It's not even the whole like thing either. Like, he unplugged the wings from his like bandolier he's got on.
Good point. Yeah, you're right. He could have taken off the whole like strapping, whatever it's called. Yeah, good point.
But okay, so I guess we're gonna move on now to the next issue we're gonna be talking about, which is The Brave and the Bold presents Hawkman.
Yes.
So this one is similar to the first origin, but it has a little bit of like a change to it with his origin. We jump right into the story where we see this dog wandering the street, and a man pulls his car over to help it. He says he's going to take care of him, bring him to the vet, fix him up. And then some smoke starts billowing from this dog, and it transforms into a big bear who then attacks the man, and then the bear walks over to the car that he had just stepped out of. So we get like a nice little interlude, I guess, or like tease at the beginning, as we now jump over to space and we see this rocket ship flying through the sky, and we are introduced to Qatar Hall and Shira, or Shira, I think in this one. It's like a different spelling.
Different spelling. Now here's the thing. I've always said Cater, but is it Qatar?
It might be Cater.
What do you think, Adam?
I think it's Qatar. At least that's how I read it, but
Qatar.
It doesn't matter.
Now Shira, because I read it as, I think they're pronounced the same way but spelled two different ways. So I read it as Shira, like Shira, and so I read the first one as Shira as well.
Oh,
but I could be wrong. I don't know.
Right.
But I'll accept Qatar.
Okay. So we're introduced to these characters, and they're searching for something, and they realize that whatever they're searching for is on Earth. So they fly their spaceship through our galaxy, and as they are closing in on Earth, the last couple of days of travel, they decide to put on some headphones and take a crash course of Earth history. And they come up with a plan to go down to Earth and find the police commissioner of whatever town they decide to go to. I think they do say it's where
I know he lives
Midtown?
in Midway Midtown. Yeah, no, Midway City. But I don't know if they call it that in this issue. But yeah, it's Midway City.
Okay, so they're gonna go down to the governor's house and convince him, like tell them what's going on, and then convince him to let them be police officers so they can investigate and figure out what's going on. So they go down there and they go to the governor's house and they sit him down by the fireplace and they explain the backstory of their like why they're there. And it turns out that they're looking for a man who was a scientist who had a scientist partner, and together they were working on this pill that could allow whoever swallowed it to transform into whatever beast and essentially like change their molecules. This man, Bith, he kills the other scientist to take the pill, or maybe he doesn't kill them. He knocks him out or whatever. He takes the pill and he goes on the run. So Shayra and Qatar are now after him, and the commissioner's kind of like, yeah, we can help you out. They set him up with some secret identities off screen, and they're kind of looking through the city to figure out what's going on. Their first idea is to don their Hawkman and Hawkwoman costumes and fly up and talk to some birds. And they pretty much are like, hey, if you see anything fishy, let us know. And that's where we end part one of this comic. Part two, we cut over to Bith as he shows up to this this like anniversary event where there's like, I don't remember exactly. Oh, it is Midway, by the way, Midway City. He goes up to this country club. There's like a fancy banquet going on. They're displaying these diamonds, and he turns into a raven or magpie, and swoops in and grabs this diamond and flies off. That's when Hawkman and Hawkgirl or Hawkwoman talk to actually, how do they find out at this point? Oh yeah, a robin shows up and tells them what's going on. So they take a net and they fly over to where this guy is staying on his like house pontoon, and he quickly turns into a pterodactyl and starts attacking them. They're like throwing nets on him. They're trying to catch him, and then he turns into a fly to fly away and escape. And then he flies right down to the water, and he turns into a fish, and they lose him in this like big school of fish. They can't find him anymore. That's part two. Cut over to part three, and we see him as in his little fish form. He's swimming around underwater, and he's going through all of these caves and these whirlpools and whatnot, and he emerges underground in like a city, like a utopia hidden in the middle of the earth. And he turns into like a wolf to escape, and he's kind of walking around and looking at all of these strange creatures in this land and kind of studying them and forming a plan. Then we cut over to Qatar and Shara, and they are talking to this woman at a museum who discovers a new type of bird. And they kind of put it together that this must be Bith messing with them. I don't really know why they come to this conclusion, but they're like, this is something weird is going on. Oh, I guess maybe they talk to the bird or whatever. I don't know. Obviously, so they figure out that they've got to. It's always talking to birds. Mm-hmm. They've got to go and find where this hidden place is. They fly down there. They're attacking this deer. I can't even remember where this part even goes.
Well, don't forget the deer can shoot electricity through its horns. That's important.
Very important, right? So that pretty much leads to nowhere, and they kind of realize that Bith is just messing with them at this point. So they go back to their normal lives. Bith comes back to the surface, and he decides, you know what, I'm going to deal with this once and for all. He turns into a dragon and starts rampaging the city, and the commissioner uses a dove to send to them to let them know that this is all going on. So they fly down to the city and they fight this dragon, and they like throw like a building on him, and he's kind of like defeated pretty easily, and they trap him in this like glass box and ship him off back to their home planet. And they decide to stay on Earth and kind of like, you know, look at things. And we have this like funny little epilogue where they have to pretend like they're looking for the rest of this bird species, knowing that it's like a hidden thing, and just to kind of play along with the woman that discovered that bird, or so she thinks. This one, I don't know. I think this one started off very strong for me. And then when things started going into the underground world and him finding like this, journey to the center of the earth land and seeing all these creatures, it really fell apart. It would be way more interesting if these creatures started showing up on Earth and they were trying to figure out what's going on, and it's Bith, right?
Good point.
I don't know. It could just be aliens from their home world, right? Because they're very similar to animals on Earth already, so we can easily draw that connection. So I'm not sure why they went with that plot point, but I think everything else in the comic is pretty all right, and I think a pretty good reimagining of this. These characters, and it feels very like Thor, right? They've taken kind of the same idea of like a Norse god. Like a long time ago, they thought that they were gods, but really they're aliens, and they think that they're gods because they're from space and they come down to Earth or whatever. So it's kind of like putting almost like science to the mythical thing. So that's really interesting that they're like kind of tied to Egyptian gods still, but they kind of explain it away by they're aliens that live on this planet, and a lot of their they don't really explain it, but you kind of get the gist of like their culture is what the ancient Egyptian culture is kind of based off of. I think that's very smart, and I'm not sure what came first, this or Thor.
This was before Marvel's Thor for sure. Yeah.
So that's pretty interesting then, right? That especially with the strange history of a Hawkman and the like constant reimagining of like the origin. I don't know why they didn't just stick with this one.
Right. Well, we should point out, because you pointed out something about the science fiction angle, is that with these reboots, Green Lantern turned from someone who got his ring from magic to someone who became a space cop, right, working for these aliens. Hawkman went from a reincarnated Egyptian prince to an alien. And then also in the 50s, we were introduced to Adam Strange, Martian Manhunter, right? So this is the 1950s, the atomic age. So this is what was really popular at the time. I obviously enjoyed this one a lot more than the other one. Again, though, there's a lot of elements, good ideas there. And for example, just the mystery of this guy coming across this weird dog and then turns into a bear. Like, that's a great little teaser for a mystery. And I like the fact that then we cut to them flying towards Earth in space. But it would have been nice to see a little bit of Thanagar, right, before they get here. The idea of like meeting the commissioner is cool, but then the way they're just like, we've got this idea, we're gonna dress up as cops and
Right.
pretend to, and then I'll get you a job and blah blah blah. Like that was a little bit too convenient. I like the subplot with the girl that Qatar is kind of flirting with, that Shira is jealous of. That's kind of cool. But again, overall, I think these exact elements could have worked if they were just reshuffled a little bit. But overall, much better than the first one. Adam, what do you think?
No, I agree. Actually, I really enjoyed this. One thing I do want to highlight is the fact that Shayera has a lot of agency in this. She is helping out Hawkman. In fact, while this came from an issue of Brave and the Bold, when there would be a Hawkman series, she would be the secondary character, but she had as many adventures as the titular Hawkman, pardon me. To me, this is just a case where we're seeing a very strong female superhero at a time where there weren't a number of them, especially at this atomic age that Mike was talking about. I love the retrofitting of the Egyptian iconography into something that is based within science fiction. And while I do agree the journey to the center of the Earth narrative seems to come out of nowhere, they did tie it in to an extent. I was actually pleasantly surprised that they had what's his name? Biff,
B-Y-T-H, I think.
It rolls off the tongue. Biff's character eventually decide, oh yeah, I can change into any animal. I can change into a Thanagarian animal, and that's how he changes into this dragon. The whole thing with him going into the center of the Earth wasn't necessary, because he could have just recuperated from the battle with the Hawk man and woman and said, oh yeah, I can change into an animal. There is some electric deer back on my planet. I'll change into that. But beyond that, I really liked the narrative. I loved the ridiculous elements. I love the fact they could talk to birds. Why? Doesn't matter. They can talk to birds. That's great. And I also have to say the art was good.
Yes.
I loved that they had good character expressions. I could actually read the emotions of various characters. I said there was no sense of dynamics in the battle sequences in the Golden Age comic. That's not the case here. You really get the sense of tension. You really get the sense of these figures flying around in the sky doing battle with Biff. Just overall, I felt this had so much more character and was satisfying. Definitely having the trappings of a Silver Age comic, but, I think you kind of had to expect a little bit of that when you're getting into something of this age.
Yeah, I think that's the only way I can excuse them talking to birds, because for all of the mockery that Aquaman gets for talking to fish, this is the exact same concept, right? We can see that they ditched that with Hawkworld, but other than that, the story was much more complicated. And yes, we have to talk about the art. Joe Kubert is someone I didn't really appreciate as a kid, but the older I get, the more I realize how great he is. I think my only criticism of his art is it's a little bit sketchy. Like in this story, it is a little bit sketchy, but you can see that his storytelling is flawless. His panel design is great. Like, if you just look at one of his pages, for example, page 4 of the original story, Hawkman is like doing up his belt. Then the next panel, he's diving down with Hawkwoman. Then the next panel, we're behind Hawkwoman as Hawkman's flying over the city. Then the next panel, they're landing on the ground. Then the next panel is a close-up of Hawkwoman's face. Like, that's great dynamic storytelling. And if you don't know, Joe Kubert founded the Joe Kubert School of Comic Book Art, or of art, I think it's called. And he's one of the legends in the industry. His two sons, Adam and Andy Kubert, are also established comic book artists. So yeah, he's definitely a legend, and I love this art. Josh, what do you think of it?
Yeah, it's great. The art itself is very solid. I think the attention to detail as well is pretty amazing. Even down to like small things like the woman at the museum discovers the bird because the bird goes into the nature exhibit that's there. And she kind of figures that, okay, it must have gotten lost, but it went back to a place where it had, it went back to a place where its surroundings was close and similar to where it normally lives. And in that exhibit, there are deer. It's like a deer, like they're stuffed deers at the museum. And we then later learn that this bird is from the same area that electric deer is from. So it's kind of like that was not written in, right? That was obviously something that was planned by the artist, I assume. And it's just like, I don't know, it well, I didn't like that subplot, obviously. I don't think any of us did. It's just nice that was there. And it makes the whole story feel like it does fit together. And the narration through the art is fantastic in this one. Even the creature design itself, I think that they're great. It's not just this big dragon that's stampeding through the city. It almost looks like a giant Komodo dragon. It's got these like weird bat wing gills type of thing that are like on the side of its head, and it's got a horn. Like it's very different from like a Western dragon, and it feels fresh and new, and it does like it has that familiarity to it, but it's alien at the same time. So the art I think is great.
Yeah. Also, when the Mavis is hitting on Qatar Hall, I love his reaction, like the close-up of his face when he's kind of like embarrassed in front of his wife. That is the kind of expression you would very rarely see in a comic from this time. Like, that's an excellent shot. And there's a lot of that in this. Like, the body language is so fluid, with this art. So yeah, I mean, and again, Joe Kubert did get better as the years went by, but you can still see how good he was even at this point. So yeah, excellent art. And like you said, the monster, the dragon was great. Like that cover, even the cover of this issue, just the way that Hawkman is swinging that mace. The mace looks heavy, right? The way that he's swinging, but the mace is trailing behind on the chain. Like, that's a great shot. It's just really smart, Yeah, great art here. So between the two, I definitely prefer the Silver Age version of Hawkman. I have my own little idea of how to revise his origin. I think it'd be cool if they used both. Like, he comes to Earth, he's an alien, then he discovers that he's reincarnated from Prince Khufu. Instead of like explaining it all and hitting you over the head with it, it'd be cool to do the mystery, but start with the alien. Anyway, that's my idea. They're not going to use it, but whatever.
Well, I think they attempted something like that at one point. Yeah. But again, you have different writers with very different ideas of what they want for the character. So I think if you had someone with a very cohesive idea of where the character is going to progress to and how the story is going to play out, it would work. Unfortunately, we've seen Hawkman change so many creators' hands over the years that sense of continuity was just lost. As we're about to discover, because you're going to be talking about Hawkworld, where, wow.
Yeah, so I already explained the setup for this one at the beginning of the podcast. I'm just going to say that Timothy Truman is known for doing the independent comics Grimjack, Scout, as well as later on he went to do Turok for Valiant Comics. So, and again, I haven't read Grimjack and Scout, but I think he's known as kind of, he writes tough, earthy, almost like Western type characters. That's what he's known for, and his art reflects that, I think. But
he also revised Jonah Hex too, and he did some war comics. So I think with that pedigree behind him, you kind of see where Hawkworld is going to end up.
Yes. So Hawkworld, number 1, this was a prestige format series, just like the Dark Knight was for Batman. This is book 1. It's called Flashzone. We've got this great shot of a completely redesigned Hawkman on the cover. He still has a version of the Hawk mask, but now without the wings. It's just the skull cap and like the beak. He has like the X on his chest with the Hawk symbol, but Everything else looks different. Now on the cover he has wings, but the rest of his costume he's got like a gun holster, a pouch, very functional, almost like just militaristic, right? So when we open up the story, we basically get this narration that I think is unnecessary, but talking about the parallels of evolution all across the galaxy with different types of life forms, and how no matter where birds evolve, they all kind of have similar habits and whatever. Kind of just like a way to introduce you to the idea of alien life, but also we see that this is an excerpt from an encyclopedia written by Perrin Cater, or Perrin Qatar, who's Qatar Hall's father. Anyway, we start out on this, on Thanagar. We're introduced to this lizard creature that is being pursued by, or no, actually he's not being pursued, but we see him eating something. He's carried over from the narration at the beginning, but we see this helicopter coming in, and we're introduced to this police force, and Qatar Hall is one of them, and then we're introduced to these other guys, and they're all kind of back and forth. They've all got different characters, and one of the little subplots that's introduced here is that Hawkman, or Qatar Hall, sees this statue of this guy, Calmoran, who I guess is almost like a Buddha or a Christ figure on Thanagar. He's like this old mythological religious figure, and Qatar wears a little, what would you call that, around his neck, like a necklace basically, right, around his neck of this guy. And so they go in on this little mission, and they're going to, I don't remember what are they investigating, they're tracking down someone, but basically what we see from the get-go is that the one guy is very violent, like he's just shoot first, ask questions later. He ends up mowing down, because this guy, is he holding this girl hostage? I don't even remember.
Yeah, they call him a wingless psychopath, and he's holding her hostage. So it's, anyway, yeah.
Well, no, feel free to jump in anytime, but basically what we are, this is basically now a cop show, or a cop story, right? Which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Again, I see nothing wrong with kind of using these characters as a way to do different genres. So it's almost like Blade Runner or something, right? We're introduced to this alien world, and as we go on, we kind of we get like the sense that there's this upper class that Qatar Hall is part of, and then this lower class that are considered like subhuman, basically. So anyway, we follow them in on this mission. We come across this guy that's holding this girl hostage, and like I said, they mow this guy down. Now he's dead, and we see these other kind of different races of aliens that we learn later are because they live there because Thanagar is an empire that's conquered other worlds and taken other races in as their kind of lower working or slave classes, right? And so we see the tears on the girl who was being held hostage on her face, and Qatar is really the only one in the group that feels any sympathy for any of these people or the situation. Everyone else is kind of just a little bit more ruthless, right? And then, now honestly, I didn't get this part. When he goes over to the wall here, what is it? Are these supposed to be like bullet holes? Like when he goes over to that white thing on the wall? I'm not sure what that is. Do you know?
I think it's like an imprint, basically, like kind of showing there's like a cavity behind it. Okay. I totally missed that. That. Okay. Josh, did you get that?
Yeah, I was gonna say it's very Shawshank.
Yeah,
kind of
gotcha.
Like silent moment where,
Right, guy. Well, again, great storytelling, but of course, I was rushing reading this in a coffee shop today because I forgot I didn't read this issue, so I had to catch up today. Long story, but anyway, so I missed that part. So anyway, when they go outside, they, now that they're done this kind of mission, that we kind of look out and we see there's all these other people around, and the guy makes a quip that he's like, many of the people here know me, Qatar. I've killed a lot of their friends. So there's, again, if you make the parallel to American culture, this would be basically a lower income neighborhood where there might be ethnic groups living in like lower quality housing than an upper class would, and so that's basically, I think, what they're trying to parallel with this whole idea here. And then we even get this confrontation between what's the other guy's name? Qatar Hall,
Oof.
and who's the guy that pulls the gun on him? But basically, he's getting tough with him, so he pulls a gun on him, and he actually pulls the trigger. But he's like, huh. So I guess he's implying that's not loaded. But he pulls the trigger, click, nothing happens. So then he just walks away. And then Qatar Hall, as like this helicopter is kind of flying away, he's like looking down at this mass of all these different alien races, just kind of looking up at him. And he's obviously, got something on his mind. Meanwhile, there's another subplot introduced that this society are pill poppers, right? So this guy's got this little pill. It's almost like a little bit of a Brave New World here. He's like popping the pill and he's trying to encourage Qatar to take one. So then he gives one to Qatar. Now, does he take it here?
No, he kind of holds on to it.
Yeah, he holds on to it. So then they fly away. And then we see Qatar kind of go into like this apartment, and he takes off the necklace, and he reads a little note from his dad. Again, even though this is an alien race, supposedly light years ahead of our technology, they don't have holograms for notes. They just have handwritten letters, which I like. That's cool. But anyway, he looks down at his hand, and he's still got the pill in his hand. He decides to pop it. So he's like, what the devil? But I guess at the time they couldn't say what the hell still, but yeah. So then they go to this party, and it looks like all these like aristocrats. And I like the fact that when they walk in the door, we see people sitting at this table, and they're all wearing animal masks, which would kind of explain why they would wear these hawk masks, which I think is kind of cool, you know? Mm-hmm. And so we're introduced right away to his father, parent, Qatar, and this is where we meet Shira, right? Mm-hmm. Is it right here? Yeah, but she's not the Shira we know from the 40s or from the 60s. This woman is a total bitch, right? Like, this waiter comes over and accidentally spills food on her, and she's so pissed off at him that she's like, I want you to clean it up. You imbecile, lick it up. She's like putting her high heels on the back of his neck, and she's a complete bitch to him. And Qatar doesn't really do much, but he's not happy about it. So he decides to leave the party, and then after he leaves, his father is talking to some other guys about different stuff. And then we see kind of Shira kind of give like a knowing look after Qatar's gone. And then he's flying along. I don't even remember what they're talking about here. But, he goes on this other mission. And now they're chasing this other alien. And they end up shooting him down. And, again, they're kind of like... They're in this sort of rough part of town, as is implied by the art. Mm-hmm. But a bunch of other guys kind of ambush them. And then they're shooting back. And one of the guys, one of the cops, gets shot and is killed. Qatar Hall is alive, but then we cut over and we see... We should have mentioned this earlier, but this is Biff, I believe, right? Which I didn't pick up on the first time I read this, but that's Biff.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I believe so.
So, and now, I should have mentioned this, but Biff is one of the cops, and they kept calling him Commander Biff at the beginning, right? So technically he's like their supervisor or something.
Mm-hmm. So a high-ranking officer.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's implied that he has paid these guys off with, it looks like US dollars, to that's how we know it's money, but the green actual dollars to paid off these guys to assassinate these cops. But so they succeeded with one of them, I guess. I thought it was two of them, but not Qatar. So Qatar's still alive. Then we cut over to a scene where we also find out that Qatar Hall is a collector of old weapons. So he's got this gun that looks like an old, basically like a 19th century gun that you'd have like a musket rifle, right? And so he's walking along with Shira, and they see some animals, and again her dialogue is kind of painting her as someone who's very cold-hearted about animals. She's talking about just hunting animals for sport, who gives a shit, right? And then they look over and they see what looks like kind of these primates, and she just unloads her gun towards them, and he's like, what the hell are you doing? And so he starts walking towards them, and then we get this great sequence where she's looking at him, and she actually lines him up in the with the like, what's that called, the scope or the sights of her gun. Like she could easily just have killed him, but she decides not to. He walks away, and we see like blood on the grass, and he's looking and he's following the blood, and he finds this tunnel, and then he goes in with his flashlight, and he sees that one of the primates has walked. Oh, it's the woman has walked in, and it looks like, is she protecting a baby? Yes, but it looks like the man is dead, covered in blood. And he's shocked, but he looks over and he sees this primitive art on the wall, and he sees it looks like a type of hawk being chasing after, it looks like them, right? And he's crying, the woman's scared, the baby's scared, so he just turns around and he puts his hand back on his little amulet, and he sees the statue of the ancient god, and then he hangs the amulet on the arm and just walks away. And then it says, next, free fall. And before I get to any of your comments, I'm going to read really quickly. Bex Luthor says, this is the worst comic ever written. Wait. It's absolute garbage. It should never have been allowed to exist. Even though and then I said I liked it, and she said, even though it looks like butt, it's your favorite. Anyway, okay, so now we'll get to your comments, Adam. What did you think of Hawkworld #1?
This was a weird issue of Judge Dredd, honestly.
I can see that.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, the cadence of the way the characters spoke, the art style, how gritty it was, it really did have all the trappings of an issue of Judge Dredd or any of the sci-fi that was coming out at the era that was very in tune to having a social message. So I'm thinking of stuff like Total Recall, Blade Runner, stuff like that.
Yes, absolutely Blade Runner, yeah.
I don't mind the social commentary. I think the idea of having these aliens kind of be a supplanting figure for, let's say, any sort of oppressed group, I think it makes sense in this narrative. And I think the realization that Carter Hall had at the end, that these things that he was seeing as nothing more than animals had sentience and feared him and the other Thanagarians, I thought that was actually somewhat profound, a little bit ham-fisted, but I thought it was effective. And that element, I think, in terms of seeing a change of his character, was great. With that said, though, I hated what they did with Shiera's character.
Yeah,
I know they're doing a completely different style, but why even name her the same name if you're going to change her drastically? The idea that he's popping pills and they don't even show what the recourse of that is. Like, he doesn't seem to be, numb to anything. He doesn't seem to be high. He just takes the pill and that's it. I do think it's funny that you mentioned he can't even say what the hell, probably because of the comics code at the time. He's popping a pill. The irony of that didn't escape me.
Yeah.
But I just felt like this was a very gritty, ugly comic that had moments of profundity. I don't want to deny that, but it seems like it was on that cusp of the edgy 90s where it saw the success of what happened with Miller and what was happening with Morrison, and it really wanted to capture that, but it just failed because it had some good ideas, but in the grand scheme of things, I think it was too busy trying to be dark and serious and edgy rather than have anything better to say. And when you also butcher characters that have a long lineage, such as Shiera's character, and I would even say Carter Hall to an extent, when you have him being indecisive, you have him deciding what the hell, I'll just pop these pills and basically be a spoilt aristocratic kid. I don't know. I didn't like how it took these characters and changed them.
Okay, Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, the world building seems a little convoluted at times. It's a bit messy. I agree. The pill popping subplot, or like, I don't even know what you would call it. It's just kind of like a thing that happens because it doesn't actually tie into the plot at all. Could have easily tied into the plot though, if at the beginning he is the one like willingly taking the pills, and then after the slaughter of his friends and his partners that was planned by Biff, we see him in like very similar to the first scene where he's looking at himself in the mirror. He goes to take the pill and then he like dumps them all down the toilet or something. Right. And then it's almost like him awakening and like waking up to all of this, and then later on seeing the like cave people, like these the cave drawings, and how I think that's definitely the best part of the comic, and it kind of feels like they had that idea set and they were like, okay, let's kind of come up with a cool idea so we could get to this like moment. But I think I really love it. it's cool that he like is looking at the human looking figure first, and then we see his eyes kind of like widen and he starts sweating as we like slowly look over and see the Hawk people, and realizing that he's not depicted as a human, he's depicted as this bird monster is really interesting. Like that kind of, he thinks he's the good guy, but seeing this, it's like it's reversed. So it's very similar to the first issue. I find like my feelings with this, there's some really great stuff in here. I love some of these small moments. The creature designs are fun. This planet is pretty cool, but a lot of the stuff isn't really like clicking, and some of the decisions that were made are like confusing why they would go in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, in the context of other DC reboots, I've read most of them, and I really hated how they changed the Legion of Superheroes from a utopian kind of fantasy of like teenagers in the future with superpowers to this dystopian, depressing thing where no one had costumes, no one had superhero names. The Earth, or the moon blows up, then the Earth blows up, and it's just so depressing. And they screwed up the challengers of the unknown, and they screwed up Green Arrow. But of all of those, I think this one does have elements that I don't like, but overall, I enjoyed this one a lot more. And I guess ideally, like if you were to readapt this today as a movie, I would maybe drop the pills. I would definitely either keep She-Ra as the old She-Ra, or I would make this She-Ra a different character. But everything else, I like the idea that, like Adam said, like why not make this like a social commentary? Like why not address these issues? That's what science fiction always does. So I think it would have been cool to use almost all of these elements to get us to the point where we have the Silver Age Hawkman, where he comes from this world, but maybe he wants to be better than this world, right? So he becomes Hawkman on our Earth or something. Almost like kind of the reverse of Krypton, where Krypton was sort of like a utopia, but Hawkworld is not. Hawkworld is a hostile, aggressor power that's taking over other planets, and Qatar Hall wants nothing to do with that. I think that would have been a cool idea. But and maybe that's what they had in mind, but they kind of screwed it up, right?
Yeah, I feel like we didn't get enough of the character thinking that the monsters were the bad guys to get that twist, right? Because we get that ending that's very strong, and then even at the beginning of this comic, the first thing that we see is this bird, this hawk that's very reminiscent of like that's exactly the original Hawkman costume, but it's an actual bird flying, and then this disgusting looking lizard jumps up and eats it and just like devours this thing, and like subliminally you're like, oh, I see, so this is the story about Hawkman and these like horrible creatures that are hunting them down and killing them. And then we get this next moment of the lizard hearing something in the background and then getting scared and running off. And we learn that it's the Hawkman in the helicopter. And you don't necessarily put the two and two together that like they're telling you it's reversed, because we see this beast do this like horrendous kind of vile thing at the start. So then at the end, when we get that reverse, it's like an aha moment. But because we don't have our main character thinking that they're doing good, it doesn't feel like it's an actual reveal.
Sure. Okay.
And I do agree with Josh with your statement earlier. Maybe if he was taking these pills to abate his guilt, or maybe just numb himself to what he was doing, I think there could have been a progression for his character that was a little bit more organic, that revealed maybe there's a reason why he's suddenly acknowledging the injustices around him. But we don't really have that. We have that inherently. He knows something is up. He knows the behavior of these hawk cops, or whatever you want to call them, is not up to par. But with that said, he's already painted as being ethically more aware and grander than his peers. But it doesn't really go anywhere with him taking the pill. It just seems superfluous. You could have cut that whole sequence. It wouldn't have mattered anything. I just want to say two things. One, I do think the opening sequence may have been a reference to The Brave and the Bold, because in The Brave and the Bold, they fought that gigantic Brontodon, and they bested it. Here, the lizard, which is a stand-in maybe for the Brontodon, ate the hawk. Maybe this is kind of the comics way of saying that Hawkman is dead. He's not making it here. And then when the lizard runs away because the helicopter's coming, here's your new Hawkman.
Yeah.
Good point. Yeah.
And the other thing I just want to touch upon quickly is just going to be the art. I actually don't mind the art. It's very gritty, very dark, heavy on the inking. I think a little bit too much, but I think the detail given to the character, the cityscapes, I think is very effective. I think the expressions you see on the aliens does communicate a sense of oppression, and there is, for me at least, sympathy generated for these things, which can be hard to do when you're drawing alien non-human entities. And the fact that the artist was able to do that, I thought was actually quite effective. I'm gonna disagree with Becca. I don't think it's an ugly comic. I think it's gritty. And while I do think, gritty for gritty's sake can be a bit juvenile, I think it was effective for the type of world they were projecting here.
Well, and also, I don't think his anatomy is perfect. Like, for example, Joe Kubert is a better artist, but the use of color here, like when they're going into a building and they're backlit by this orange and purple light, like it's not just dark and gritty. It's like there's a texture to his art, and even though his anatomy is not perfect, the way that he draws the shadow and the cross hatching, I think, brings you into this genre. Like, you want it to feel gritty, you want it to feel dirty, and I think he pulls that off really effectively. Sorry, and we should also mention the colorist is Sam Parsons. Yeah, I think the color in this was a key part of the art. But but as far as Timothy Truman himself, yes, I think the art was really effective. Nothing wrong with it, not ugly at all. And there was a lot of dark and gritty and ugly comics from DC at this point, but this is not one of them, I don't think, at all. And we'll talk more about DC reboots in every episode of Slam. Coming up next week, it's the one you've been waiting for. It's Johnny Thunderbolt. Everyone's so excited that we haven't been able to book a guest yet, but we'll surprise you next week when we have our guest. And on the next episode of Taped Crusaders, we will be reviewing Spider-Man. So,
that's right.
Yeah, be sure to join us for that. And thank you again, Adam and Josh. You can take it from here.
Yeah, you can find all of our stuff over on our website at thecomicbooksyndicate.com. You can also find our stuff on YouTube or Facebook. Leave us a comment, good or bad. Let us know what you guys think about the podcast and the stuff we're talking about. So, keep that conversation going.
All right, so until the next time, see you later.